Welcome to Walking the Haftarah. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah Portion PEKUDEI. This week's Torah portion is Exodus 38:21 through 40:38. And our Haftarah this week is 1 Kings 7:51 through 8:21. PEKUDEI means accountings of, as in the opening line of the Torah portion that reads, "These are the records of, or the accountings of, the tabernacle of the testimony, as they were recorded at the commandment of Moses, the responsibility of the Levites under the direction of Ithamar the son of Aaron the priest." Exodus 38:21. During non-leap years, this week's portion will be part 2 of a double portion with last week's Torah portion by Echel. Also, this is the last Torah portion of the book of Shemot, or Exodus. In this week's portion, the tabernacle construction is complete, and in our Haftarah, we will see the completion of the temple by King Solomon. Let's begin with reviewing this week's Torah portion. Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, made all that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh commanded Moses, and with him was Oholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, an engraver and designer and embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. Exodus 38:22 through 23. We discussed last week that Bezalel means in the shadow of God, or in the image of God. But along with Bezalel, we have Oholiab. Oholiab means tent of his father. So with these two master craftsmen, we can see a picture of the image of God in the tent of his father. This to me shows forth the essence of the tabernacle and Yeshua, who was the image of God and was the tent of his father, which would be the container or the essence of his father. Next, we are given an accounting of the gold, the silver, and the bronze or copper that was used in the construction of the Mishkan. The sages say, compared to the gold and silver that were used in the temples of Solomon and Herod, the amounts listed here are insignificant. Nevertheless, the tabernacle surpassed both temples in holiness. This proves that God rests his presence not where there is wealth, but where there is righteousness. Chapter 39 begins with the details of Aaron, the high priest's garments. We cover the ephod, the breastplate or the breastpiece, the robe, the linen tunics and coats, and the headplate or crown of the Kohen Gadol. Then we read, "Thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished, and the people of Israel did according to all that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had commanded Moses, so they did." Exodus 39:32. This verse parallels the opening verse in our Haftarah this week and is one of the connections used to tie them together. Next, all of the things that were made for the tabernacle were brought to Moses so he could inspect them, ensure that everything needed was accounted for, and that everything was done according to the pattern that was shown him on the mountain. Moses was the only one to physically see the design that Adonai showed him, and as such, he's the only one that could ensure that it was actually correct. According to all that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had commanded Moses, so the people of Israel had done all the work. And Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had done it. As Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had commanded, so they had done it. Then Moses blessed them. Exodus 39:42 and 43. When we usually think about this generation of Israelites with Moses, we're typically drawn to their many mistakes and shortfalls. But the building of the Mishkan is one of the high points for them as a community, truly acting as one body with love in Echad. This was a massive undertaking, and there was no rework, a testimony to what Adonai can do through us, his people, when we are willing. Where the text says that Moses blessed them, it's believed, and stated by Rashi, that the blessing was the same that was written in Psalm 90, verse 17, a psalm written by Moses, the man of God. "Let the favor of Adonai our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands." Psalm 90 is directly attributed to Moses, as it begins with a prayer of Moses, the man of God. It's also believed that Moses wrote Psalms 90 through 100, though only Psalm 90 has that direct attribution. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to Moses, saying, "On the first day of the first month you shall erect the tabernacle of the tent of meeting." Exodus 40, 1 and 2. This is also known as the first of Nisan on the Jewish calendar. Adonai then tells Moses how to set up everything in the tabernacle and how to prepare the priesthood for service. This Moses did, according to all that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh commanded him, so he did. In the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. Moses erected the tabernacle. Exodus 40, 16 through 18. So Moses erected the Mishkan as Adonai had instructed almost on the exact anniversary of the Exodus. Moses began by putting up the sanctuary structure. He then put the tablets of the testimony into the Ark of the Covenant, attached the mercy seat, and placed it in the Holy of Holies. Next, he placed the table with the bread of the presence in the holy place, and he placed the menorah and kindled its lamps. He then placed the golden altar and burned the sacred incense on it. Next, he set up the sacrificial altar and placed a burnt offering, an olah, and a meal offering, a mincha. Then he placed the laver between the tent of meeting and the altar and filled it with water for washing. Finally, Moses erected the courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar. So Moses completed the work. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it. And the glory of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh filled the tabernacle. Throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. Exodus 40, 34 through 38. I mentioned this before, but how powerfully awesome the presence of the Holy One was, to where Moses, who stood in the cleft of the rock as Adonai passed him by, who spoke to Adonai face to face, was not able to enter the Mishkan because of his glory. The commentary addresses the Mishkan being properly assembled and Adonai's glory falling on it. The process of constructing the tabernacle was climaxed by as phenomenal an occurrence as human beings have ever been able to bring about. The glory of God rested upon the handiwork of man, in full sight of every Hebrew man, woman, and child. Now they would see their tabernacle enveloped in holiness, the tabernacle that was built with their gifts, made by their hands, erected by their prophet, made possible by their repentance, assuring them that God's presence would forever remain in their midst, if they would but continue to make it welcome. This concludes the book of Shemot, or Exodus, and it's customary when finishing a book of the Torah that we proclaim, Chazak, Chazak, Venit Chazek, which means, be strong, and may we be strengthened. This brings us to our Haftarah this week, Melachim 1, or 1 Kings 7:51 through 8:21. Thus all the work that King Solomon did on the house of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was finished. And Solomon brought in the things that David his father had dedicated, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and stored them in the treasuries of the house of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. 1 Kings 7:51. As I mentioned before, this opening line that states that all the work that King Solomon had done completing the temple was finished parallels Moses completing the tabernacle in Exodus 39:32. King David was given the vision and the plans for the temple, but was not allowed to build it. David did amass great stores of wealth and materials that were to be used by Solomon to build the temple, including 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver. You can read about this in 1 Chronicles 22. But in our opening verse, we see bringing these items that were dedicated by his father, King David, into the treasuries after the temple construction was finished. There are differing views on or ideas about what is meant by this. One view is that what was left over after the construction, meaning that David had collected more than enough for the job and the leftover was brought into the treasuries. There are other views, but they all see that Solomon did not use the materials that King David had collected for various reasons. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the leaders of the fathers' houses of the people of Israel before King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the ark of the covenant of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh out of the city of David, which is Zion. 1 Kings 8:1. The leaders were gathered as witnesses as the ark was brought into the newly constructed temple. When David first conquered Jerusalem, his first move was to conquer Zion fortress, which was later renamed the City of David. And you can find that in 2 Samuel 5:7. Later, the name Zion became synonymous with the temple itself, the Temple Mount, and Jerusalem as a whole. And all the men of Israel assembled to King Solomon at the feast in the month of Etanim, which is the 7th month. And all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark. Verses 2 and 3. The month of Tishrei is labeled here as Etanim, which means the mighty ones in Hebrew. All the people were gathered because we are at the fall feasts, Yom Teruah, or Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. And they brought up the ark of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the tent of meeting, and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. The priests and the Levites brought them up. And King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel who had assembled before him were with him before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and oxen that they could not be counted or numbered. Verses 4 and 5. The Ark of the Covenant, along with the entire Mishkan and its contents, were brought up from Gibeon to Jerusalem. Then the priests brought the Ark of the Covenant of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh into its place in the inner sanctuary of the house, in the most holy place, underneath the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread out their wings over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim overshadowed the ark and its poles. And the poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place before the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen from the outside. And they are there to this day. Verses 6 through 8. Solomon had constructed 2 10-cubit-high golden cherubim that were to be placed in the Holy of Holies, and the ark was placed under their wings. The ark was positioned so that the poles of the ark were visible from the sanctuary from the inside, or that you could actually see the form of them as the curtain laid against the actual handles. It's believed that Solomon knew the temple would one day be destroyed, so it's said that he had built an underground hiding place to keep the Ark of the Covenant safe. The belief is that King Josiah feared an enemy attack and ordered the Ark to be placed into hiding, and some believe that this is where it still sits to this day. There was nothing in the Ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses put there at Horeb, where Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh made a covenant with the people of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. Verse 9. Aaron's staff that had budded and the container of manna that were thought to be kept next to the ark and not actually in the Ark of the Covenant. And when the priest came out of the holy place, a cloud filled the house of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh filled the house of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Like in our Torah portion, once the temple was completed and the Ark of the Covenant put in place, the holy presence of the Holy One filled the temple so that the priest could not stand to minister. Again, what an awesome scene. I would love to be there to experience this, and we may have a chance to experience this in the future. Then Solomon said, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has said that he would dwell in thick darkness. I have indeed built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever. Verses 12 and 13. The thick darkness where Adonai dwells can also be translated as thick cloud. This is how the Art Scroll translates it. On the surface, darkness and a cloud seem vastly different. But think of it from an experiential point of view, kind of more from a Hebrew mindset. If you're standing in the middle of a thick cloud or standing in thick darkness, you open your eyes, what can you see? Absolutely nothing. The same experience. The cloud of Adonai's glory filled the tabernacle, or we could say his presence filled the tabernacle. So Solomon is stating that he has built a house where his presence, his cloud of glory, can dwell forever. Then the king turned around and blessed all the assembly of Israel, while all the assembly of Israel stood. Verse 14. This parallels our portion where Moses also blessed the people after the construction of the Mishkan was complete in Exodus 39:43. And he said, Blessed be Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of Israel, who with his hand has fulfilled what he promised with his mouth to David my father, saying, Since the day that I have brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I chose no city out of all the tribes of Israel in which to build a house, that my name might be there. But I chose David to be over my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of David my father to build a house for the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of Israel. But Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh said to David my father, Whereas it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well that it was in your heart. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son, whom shall be born to you, shall build a house for my name. Now Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has fulfilled his promise that he made. For I have risen in the place of David my father, and sit on the throne of Israel, as Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had promised. And I have built the house for the name of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, the God of Israel. And there I have provided a place for the ark, in which is the covenant of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh that he made with our fathers when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. Verses 15 through 21. Solomon's prayer ends our Haftarah this week. I want to cover one more thing before we leave the book of Exodus or Shemot. Rabbi Foreman brought out the fact of being a very large chiasm that covers the back end of the book of Exodus. So a chiastic structure, if you're not familiar, is an ancient way of highlighting text. You'll find similar words, themes that will connect together. Say you're reading something and you read something that kind of sticks out to you, then you read a few verses later, then you read almost the exact same thing. And that may be pointing to a chiasm. So when you read those two together, you want to see what's in between there. So the simplest point is you could have a three-line chiasm or a three-idea chiasm. In other words, this is connected to this, very similar themes, and you want to say what's in between there. That's usually what it's trying to highlight, the central axis or the central point. But the chiasm can be very large, right? So you could have a 3, you could have a 5, you could have a 7, which would be a full menorah. You can see a chiasm like this. Or it can even go on and on. It can cover books of the Bible. It can be individual words that just seem to tie together. But the big idea is you want to find out what's in the actual center. So a chiasm is more of a scholarly term, and it's probably the one you're going to hear the most, but the Hebrew term for it is actually an atbash structure. The idea of the Hebrew aleph bet, or their alphabet, actually starts with aleph and ends in tav. So the outer ends, the aleph and the tav, is at. And then if you want to go one in, the second letter in the aleph bet is the bet, and the second to the last is the sheen. So bet sheen is bash. So that's why they call it an atbash structure. But it's the same thing as chiasm. So the outer bands of our chiasm, the ones we're going to start, usually going to try to find the outside, and we're going to work our way slowly towards the middle. So their outer bands actually begin with the cloud that's on top of Mount Sinai that we found in Exodus 24, verses 15 through 18. Then Moses went up on the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. The glory of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh dwelt on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called to Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Now the appearance of the glory of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was like a devouring fire on the top of the mountain in the sight of the people of Israel. Moses entered the cloud and went up on the mountain, and Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Now, the matching chiasm on the other side of the pattern, we kind of looked at the beginning, so now we're going to look at the end, is at the very end of the book in this week's portion, chapter 40, 34 through 38. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh filled the tabernacle, and Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud settled on it, and the glory of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh filled the tabernacle. Throughout all their journeys, whenever the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the people of Israel would set out. But if the cloud was not taken up, then they did not set out till the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was on the tabernacle by day, and fire was in it by night, and the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. So we see many similarities between these two sets of Scripture, and that's what kind of relates or ties the two things together. One is Adonai's cloud of glory rested upon the mountain, and then later it covered the tent of meeting. Another piece is that Moses entered the cloud on the mountain, but later the cloud entered or filled the tabernacle, and Moses was unable to enter. Again, the appearance of Adonai's glory on the mountain was a consuming fire. But later, the fire was in the cloud that covered the tabernacle at night, which was also his presence. And there are lots more, and you can really dig in. They're very interesting to find all the little nuggets, but we're not going to get too detailed today. But we'll briefly cover these two events next week as we begin the book of Leviticus. The next in our set of chiasms, so we're on the outside. Now we're going to start working our way in because we want to find our way to the central point. So working our way inward after the glory at Mount Sinai is the detailed description of the items of the tabernacle. This goes on from chapter 25 all the way through chapter 32. Quite a lot of text. The companion text on the other side of the chiastic structure is, of course, the actual construction of everything that was shown Moses on the mountain. This begins in chapter 35:4 all the way through chapter 40:33. So, again, working our way in, next we're going to find the Shabbat. So, the Sabbath and the regulations for the Sabbath. So the beginning of this, working our way at the front end of the chiasm, is Exodus 31:12 through 17. And the other end, where it's talking about the Sabbath on the backside of the chiasm, is Exodus 35:1 through 3. So what's between the two Sabbath pieces is the actual central axis. So what is between that? It's Torah Portion PEKUDEI, beginning in 32:1 to the end of chapter 34. And this is the golden calf, Adonai's anger, Israel's repentance, Moses' intercession, and finally Adonai's forgiveness and the restoration of the covenant. I believe this is here to point to the work of Yeshua. Mankind has failed our Creator. But Moses, a foreshadow of Messiah, offered himself for the people. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book that you have written. Exodus 32:32. This sacrificial action provided restoration for the people of Israel to the Holy One of Israel. This work transformed the awesome and terrifying consuming fire on Mount Sinai to the protective overseeing cloud and fire that was among his people, leading them day by day. Truly, I believe the picture of the work of Messiah Yeshua. I pray this teaching has been edifying. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One. With love, in Echad, Shalom.